Hey guys, here today to talk about one of my all-time favorite American film directors, Robert Altman. He's really just one of the ultimate directors when it comes down to it. I mean, he really is up there like John Cassavetes, Francis Ford Coppola, Martin Scorsese, Paul Thomas Anderson, all those. He's like kind of on that league of just a genius director, truly. I mean, yeah, he's had some misfires. Not all of his films are masterpieces, but when he lands, which is very often, about half the he has a massive filmography. Now, I still haven't even seen all of it, but there's so much. But from everything I've seen, the majority of his films are genuine masterpieces. Like he has a very one of a kind note. And it seems like he was just open to doing any kind of genre. He's so uniquely adventurous in his eye. Very perceptive. You know, he just liked to study characters. He reminds me so much of Paul Thomas Anderson. He's like his older dad or something because he's very big on ensemble cast. He really likes to just kind of perceive characters, kind of troubled characters one way or another. And yeah, he can just do anything with it, make a masterpiece. So let's get into his filmography. So I know the first one we really took off with was in 1969, That Cold Day in the Park, which I have not seen, so I can't say much about that one. But I've heard it's a pretty good thriller. I do want to check that one out eventually, as well as about any film of his I haven't seen yet. But getting into territory that I have seen is starting in 1970. He made two comedies this year, two vastly different kinds of comedies, which is perfect because, yeah, one I love, one I don't really like. I'll start with the one I don't like, which is MASH. I just really didn't get this one. It didn't really have any of that Altman magic that I find in a lot of his other films. It just felt more, just like too much, like maybe it's just too much macho humor for my taste or something. It really didn't land for me in the way that's something like Dr. Strangelove. I feel like it was going for that kind of Dr. Strangelove satire, but it just, maybe the humor went over my head. It wasn't for me. At the end of the day, I really gave it a fair chance. Maybe I'll eventually watch it again and feel a little different. Maybe I won't. But the first great film I think he made is the same year he made Brewster McCloud. Now, this is just a very original, one-of-a-kind quirky comedy. I just like how wacky this is from start to finish. Like, Bud Cort is just particularly a really resonating kind of goofball character. Like there's something kind of like whimsical about him, but he just gets into all these just absurd situations with all these absurd characters, like kind of awkward kind of stuff. Like I feel like this movie is very much awkward humor. It really aligns well with my own taste of humor. So it's kind of the brand of humor I often feel like naturally comes out of me. I feel like this film just strangely resonates a lot with all of that. A really funny movie. I guess there's so many great golden moments. It's consistent too. Like, it's never really a moment where it's like, all right, it's almost taking it never takes itself too seriously. That's what's so great about it. It's always kind of at joke with itself. Like, never really seen anything like it. It's very much a one of a kind, even in Altman's filmography. I feel like he always has like a sense of humor through his films, like a certain kind of dark humor, more quirky, kind of a blend of quirky and dark. But I feel like this is maybe one of the lightest, breeziest of comedies he's made, although there are still dark moments in this one too. But this one's a little more for the family, I think, than the rest of his films are. And then now getting into masterpiece territory. Man, this guy was kind of the bee's knees throughout a lot of the 70s. I mean, he really made some of the most effortlessly cool films I've ever seen. Most thought-provoking, fascinating. In 1971, he made a masterpiece. This is a film called McCabe and Mrs Miller. Some of the greatest characters of any Western ever made, in my opinion. I think that some of those deepest, most fully realized. What I really love about this film is how it's like a very subtle satire on mythology in general, and how, and I feel like a lot of like Western mythology is based on, the characters who have a certain kind of myth behind them. But this is a film that's trying to debunk the legend of the myth of the typical Western, as the characters kind of get into certain situations as they build their empire. Like they kind of like end up looking more foolish than they look clever in a lot of ways. And this film is just a really subtle masterpiece as far as just capturing just kind of everyday life is in the West is a gritty drama, really. Like this really isn't even like Good, the Bad, stylized like Good, the Bad, the Ugly. If anything, the style of this film is all about its minimalism. Like it's very minimalist. And I didn't even love this movie the first time I saw it. I didn't even really appreciate what this was trying to do here. I've never seen a film that just feels more like Frontierland Americana, like truly. Like it really just feels authentic. And again, I think what I mean by like, kind of like taking out the mythology, like it kind of just ends up making like heroism in the modern world seem a little absurd at the end. No one's really a hero in this story. It's very just much a grounded, straightforward story And it's just kind of trying to capture like subtle ticks and characters. And yeah, your gruff exterior is always going to end up being a bit foolish given most situations, and it's kind of just a debunk of how just watching a scenario of that unfold in the most kind of like subtly satirical kind of way, but also very serious too. Like it's pretty great. One of the best parts of the film too is the Leonard Cohen soundtrack. Oh, I love this piece so much. I love that man and his music, and it really complements this movie perfectly. About as great as Simon and Garfunkel did for The Graduate. Like it just feels like a Leonard Cohen song. Watching this whole movie feels like a Leonard Cohen song. It's just one of the most timeless films I've ever seen. Like it really reminded me of like watching stuff like There'll Be Blood, where you get this kind of Americana mystique. And again, it's like characters who like have a certain mythology to them, but you kind of look past it beneath the surface, and you can kind of just see how foolish, a lot of people really are when you get past that gruff exterior. A lot of people don't really know what the hell they're doing. And this is a movie that just really isn't afraid to just get deep into just a man just kind of gradually becoming a complete fool, and it's like, what the hell do you do in these situations? Yeah, it's really unpredictable. It's really rewatchable. Dialogue is some of the best I've ever heard. I could just watch this movie endlessly in this world that it creates. I never get sick of it. Yeah, so it's a freaking masterpiece. It's one of the best films to come out of the 70s. One of the best Westerns ever made, honestly. I think it beats about any other Western outside of Sergio Leone, in my opinion. Maybe The Unforgiven also by Clint Eastwood. And then in 1972, we get to a very underrated film. This is called Images. This is like, I feel like Robert Altman didn't really venture much into the psychological thriller territory, but when he did, that man was a master at it. I'm really shocked he couldn't do it more, because it's like on the same level as Ingmar Bergman at his best, honestly. This is a very surreal movie. And I would say another film that it really reminded me a lot of was, it felt like a lot like a Taxi Driver kind of deal, where you're just kind of watching like the diary of a mad woman, basically, and just kind of like the little moments and glimpses of just her completely losing her sanity. And it's played masterfully by Susanna York. I mean, she is so good in this. I think that what Robert Altman does so masterfully, and this is how a lot of his films are, but it really works here, is just that he has a very hazy outlook on life, very dreamlike, and it kind of does like a warm up to what he would go on to do with Three Women a little later into the 70s, which we'll most certainly be getting to that. This was just very underrated. It's kind of like John Williams, who did the Star Wars soundtrack, did this soundtrack. This is one of his first scores. I think it's the only horror film score he ever composed, and it's amazing. It's just so creepy and intense. Really lends a lot of the atmospherics behind the film. And it's just like how the character Catherine is. You're always on the edge of your seat. You never really know what's real, what's not real. It just always kind of feels like you're in a state of mind of just some true psychological terror. It's very devastating. Like, I definitely has an emotional core to it, like Taxi Driver does, where you feel like this certain devastation. It's not like the film itself is being emotional, but you just can't help but feel emotional just watching someone fall this, deep into a psychological scar. Just very much losing her mind. And it's one of Altman's best moments, I think. It really gets better the more you think about it. It reminds me a lot of like a Polanski thriller kind of thing, like Repulsion, Rosemary's Baby. It kind of feels like that to me also. But yeah, it really is just one of the best takes on just a feminine mental breakdown. It's not something I've seen too often in a lot of movies done this masterfully, but this is just very unique. In 1973, he made The Long Goodbye, another just all-time masterpiece. Like, this guy has so many masterpieces under his belt. It's kind of insane, honestly. It's probably one of the longest videos because of that. But yeah, Long Goodbye, a pure masterpiece from start to finish. One of the most entertaining, cool, effortlessly cool movies I've ever seen. It really much reminds me of the impact Inherent Vice had on me when I first saw that in theaters. Where it just feels like a true hippie noir. Like, I feel like you're in California. Everyone's kind of in that post-hippified, sort of state of melancholia. And there's just such a vast amount of cool value and mystique to Philip Marlowe in this movie. I think Elliot Gould plays this just so well. One of the most effortlessly cool actors I've ever seen. One of the best screenplays. And Altman just really made it a world entirely of its own. Much like I was saying with Inherent Vice, even The Big Lebowski kind of fits in this category, where it's kind of like a noir. Except this and Inherent Vice are a little more serious than Big Lebowski. I think the story lends itself to, I guess, a little more of a serious tone. Big Lebowski, which is a perfect movie for what it's doing, is kind of a more of a goofball. I think this is actually kind of trying to take you through like an experience where you feel kind of like something profound as much as you're entertained and laughing through all this. It's a very low-key movie, and I think that I would honestly almost say that it's one of his most layered films, because every time I rewatch it, there's just so many details. Like I said, Altman's a man of detail. I feel like he was trying to capture detail in a very jazz-like manner. Like these films feel like jazz, where there's like a lot of loose energy, but there's like a really tight focus going on beneath the looseness. Like it does kind of feel like there's a great attention to detail, but you almost wouldn't notice because it's so subtle. I just think he's subtly one of the most genius directors of all time, and this is a fantastic reason why. And I think this might be one of his best entry moments because it really does masterfully balance his comedic and dramatic shades. Like there's subtle layers of humor, but it's a movie I ultimately end up taking very seriously. I walk out just like seeing a lot of myself in the whole story, and just it's really a mesmerizing film. In 1974, he made he made a couple of movies. The one I've only seen one, and it's called California Split. And this kind of feels like a continuation in spirit, almost like an expansion pack of what The Long Goodbye laid out. But truly, Elliot Gould, I think the conclusion is that Elliot Gould is just one of the coolest actors in movies. He really has a unique, cool factor to him. Like, it's one of a kind. He reminds me a lot of, like, always gives me like a Lou Reed kind of feeling a little bit, but just in actor mode. There's so much fun behind this movie. And I feel like the more I watch Altman movies, the more I kind of just, this is another one that just solidified. I was like, Altman's just the man. Like, it's insane he can make this many good movies. And this is another movie that just really captures what California was like in kind of like post-hippified America. And there's a lot of fading optimism going on at the time, and I think that Altman was just out to really capture that and see what people were really get to the core of what people were really looking for in this time, which ends up being really timeless and ahead of its time too. I would say. I think like I watch it now and I'm like that resonates every bit as much in this decade as it did in the 70s. I think just we're kind of all in a state of hazy confusion, but we're all kind of just trying to find that bit of. We're all trying to find something of a bit of just understanding, optimism, joy, whatever it may be. We're all looking for something in the end, something of a humanity in the characters that he really is fascinated by. This movie reminded me the most of Uncut Gems of all movies I've seen, except this one's way less intense. That one's like a genuine anxiety attack from start to finish. I love the movie, but man, it's so heavy. If you're feeling like Uncut Gems vibes and just don't feel like having a heart attack, this is the movie to watch because it's really good. In the same year, he made a movie called Thieves Like Us, which I've not seen, but I'm very fascinated by it. From all I've heard, it sounds like it would be another great Altman movie. And then in 1975, it feels surreal how many movies he's made that are masterpieces. But he made one of his best of all time. This is called Nashville. The best way I could define this movie is it might be one of the least exhausting epics I've ever seen in my life. I mean, there are literally 24 storylines. I shit you not, 24 storylines in a span of 2 hours and 40 minutes. And every single one of them, I just want to know more about them. When I watch it, it's like he just makes these stories and these characters so effortlessly interesting that I'm always on the edge of my seat, just wanting to know more. That's just the magic of Altman, I think. He really has that unique way of just intriguing you. It's so subtle, but once you kind of like crack past the subtlety, it feels like his films are just everything. Like it's everything you need. I never get tired of this world. Like, again, it's set in Nashville, Tennessee, which, hey, I live in Tennessee, so that alone kind of gives it a personal spark. I can kind of see, like, I've always been kind of fascinated what, like, the music scene in Nashville was like, before I was born. And this movie literally captures that, I feel like. This is one of his best ever. What it really does so flawlessly is it just captures, Altman had a very distinctive vision of America in general. Very cynical, I would say, but he also kind of loves a lot of the foundation of what our country is, which in all honesty, I think I can 100% relate. Maybe his films kind of help me mold this particular viewpoint, but I think I just can really find a lot of my own viewpoints through Altman's vision of our country. Like, I feel a lot of cynicism. I see a lot of bad, but then I just see like a lot of good in its heart also. And I just want to always kind of hold on to that no matter how bad things become. I always want to hold on to the greater good and just try to be a walking force of it. In my movies, I hope to kind of like, eventually build up the saying something of an impact of just, hey, like this is what like this is what it is, but this is also what it could be. Like that's just kind of a true American dreamer, I guess you could say. I don't know. I just feel really rewarded whenever I watch this film. Like it can be a little challenging at times because it's so uncomfortably close to home, which I really think makes this like a foundation for a lot of indie films to come, like in the 90s, where it feels like it's very close to home. There's a lot of moments where I feel cringy because it's like, yeah, oh God, I do that. And I'm not proud of that exactly. So I'm glad the movie is therapeutic enough to just, get it out of my system so I can think about, be more mindful of these things. Maybe that's like a very That's a very just stereotypical thing to do, you could say. And sometimes I'll watch that and feel a little embarrassed if someone saw me doing something like that. Yeah, it really just comes down to that ensemble cast. I mean, there are so many giants. It seems like he just wanted to work with every giant actor he could find and more. I'm so fascinated by the mind of a director who just wants to work with this many actors. It's like, I think I get it, but I'm like, dang, it just seems like it would be so ambitious when you're there. But I'm sure it'd be really rewarding and exciting. It seems like it'd be the most exciting thing to just once you kind of build all that momentum up and pull it off effectively. The dialogue just floats so smoothly, and I feel like I think that Altman kind of had that overlapping dialogue. That's what he's most famous for, and this film really, I would say the way he writes his dialogue almost is the atmosphere in a way, because there's a certain haziness that's in the air where you hear everybody talking, but there's always this question mark of where the hell is this going exactly, which I think is kind of the suspense element that Altman generates so well. You don't really know where his films are taking you, but you kind of just go with the ride. It's like listening to a song. You don't really know. You don't really even need to. I don't think he really wants you to think about where it's going next. It's jazz. He wants to just put you in a moment. He wants you to embrace the moment with his movies. And I think this is a movie that just naturally will make you do that. Yeah, again, Altman I think is a perfectionist, but he's a loose perfectionist. That's what makes him different from. I think he's equally as great as Stanley Kubrick, but I think what makes him different is that he's looser and just a little bit. He cares a lot about his characters. You can tell he really does care. He's he almost has a tough love for his characters. He shows embarrassing moments, but that there's a sincerity behind all of it, a modesty, you could say. There was just so much confusion going on in the 70s, and this movie was out to just really capture a lot of that particular paranoia, all that intense energy in the air. And the soundtrack is also another part of the movie. And I know you could always argue that it's a little oversaturated. Maybe there's some songs that aren't amazing, but I kind of dig it all the way through because that's part of the experience. I mean, yeah, you go there, not everyone's going to be an amazing musician. There are going to be some duds out there, but that's part of it. It's just kind of fun, interesting to watch. A lot of musicians who might be in over their head, they might think they're better than they really are, so they're running on a lot of delusion. I think my favorite song in the movie had to be, I think it was Keith Carradine's "I'm Easy." That was a pretty great moment. It's really funny too because there's all these characters, and they all think that he wrote the song about them. It's oh no, yeah, but it's amazing. It's one of the best examples of world building I've ever seen. Extremely entertaining. I mean, I watch this and I'm like, I think some people find this boring, and I kind of don't know how. I'm like, to me, it's like a circus of entertainment from start to finish. It's one of the least boring things I've ever seen in my life. So yeah, freaking masterpiece. And then 1976, he made a movie I never saw called Buffalo Bill and the Indians, or Sitting Bull's History Lesson. I'll probably get to it eventually. I don't really know much about that. It doesn't personally intrigue me, but I'll probably see it eventually because it's Altman. I'm one of those guys where I may not be interested in the movie, but if I see someone directed it, I follow that sometimes. I'm like, okay, maybe there's something. If he's made something that hit me in a certain way before, hey, maybe he'll do it again. Who knows? And then in 1977, he made in my opinion, this is his number one best film, Three Women. Holy shit, man. So to start off, I think this film has grown on me even more at time because I feel like I've had a roommate situation where I'm like, this basically mirrors what it was like, really weird way. It's like, I feel like I was Sissy Spacek in this case, kind of the naive, kind of guy. And I'm kind of hanging out with this guy. He's a lot more extroverted, a lot more of a social butterfly. And it's almost just like what happens whenever you live together, and it's almost just too much. There's always a certain point where a certain kind of, it's almost like they subconsciously have something they both kind of desire in each other. But once they, kind of are around each other for too long, they almost start to swap. It's like their identities get kind of weird for a little while. So, like I said, you get a naive guy like me thrown into all that, and I'm like, yeah, I almost get confused by all the, over the top, just socialization in general, to the point where it almost makes me like that a little bit. So it's like it almost literally changes them. It's a lot like what Persona was doing, where it's like, get into the same room for too long, you reveal too much information, and it can just get weird. Something feels kind of awkward and wrong about it. This is like the Americana take of Persona. I would say it literally is like the American Persona, layered as hell from start to finish. There's just so much strange imagery that looks like it came straight out of a gallery, but all that strange imagery is kind of just trying to create this dreamlike atmosphere. I'm not even sure that he's trying to completely make sense as much as he's just trying to make you really feel something through all that, which I think he does extremely successfully. You got Shelley Duvall, Sissy Spacek. They're some of the greatest characters and performances out of anything that came out of the 70s. I feel like Altman was trying to just deconstruct any kind of like, I guess just like form of traditionalism with this movie. I think he really wanted to break a lot of rules. And he literally was just trying to lay out a dream that he had once. And there's just not like this is I would say this continues to run with what Images was doing. Most of the movies I mentioned are layered with like a lot of characters. But I think this one, he wanted to get more into minimalism. Just ultimately give you an experience that's very atmospheric, but you'll never really forget what you're watching. Like it's I would call it kind of disturbing. Like there's something very off about the vibes in this movie, and that's what it's trying to do. But like it just increasingly feels kind of wrong. I would say a lot of that just kind of comes from all the bizarre shots of the paintings, the bizarre shift in personalities. Everyone's, the two characters just increasingly are acting very eccentric. Like you said, someone's a little more almost like one gets too bratty and then one gets too naive, and there can be some weird things that get out of it. But it ends up kind of being something of a spiritual connection they have, because they, like I said, they kind of go through this weird kind of shift in perception in their own way. It's consistently perfect. Like I've never seen a film that mirrored. It literally feels like Altman was kind of paving the way for guys like David Lynch to come around. Like it really reminds me of that David Lynch feeling, but it's its own thing entirely because it's just a very like distinctively Americana vision of late 70s, and just seeing something truly mind-bending happen. Like I really would have loved to have seen this one like in theaters when it came out. I feel like this really had to be like a low-key brain fuck for a lot of people. In 1978, he made another ensemble film I really want to see called A Wedding. I've not seen that yet, but I'm very intrigued. In 1980, 1979, he had a Paul Newman movie called Quintet. Haven't seen that. Popeye, I've not seen that one. I've heard I'm not too interested, honestly. It seems like it'd be I've heard it's kind of a misfire in the scheme of Altman movies, so I don't know if I'm that interested. In the 80s in general, I think he kind of, there's a lot of, so many artists did it. In the 70s, they're the kings, and then it's like the 80s just didn't hold up for a lot of those, 70s giants. And unfortunately, Altman was one of those, I think, for the most part. I haven't seen Come Back to the 5'9" Jimmy Dean. I've heard that's one of the best works he did of the 80s, which, yeah, I'll probably get to that eventually. My favorite film he made in the 80s was Secret Honor. This is basically just like kind of like a takedown on, what the hell? Richard Nixon, yeah. This is like the only time Altman's really just explored one man the entire way through. And I'd say this just came out absolutely fantastic. You got Philip Baker Hall playing Richard Nixon. He's very lonely, very isolated, very crazy, paranoid, just everything you'd expect a Richard Nixon exploration to be by Robert Altman. It almost feels like it's just a play, but it's really about as well made as the movie 12 Angry Men as far as the directing end goes. It's kind of got an over-the-topness behind it all, but it's really entertaining. Just watching Nixon just kind of having this nervous breakdown the entire way through. Yeah, it's essential. Yeah, in 88, he made a movie called Tanner 88. I haven't seen that. Yeah, Vincent and Theo, I've not seen that one. Yeah, 1992, it's like he had a bit of a comeback in the early 90s. That he made two films that are on the exact same league as his best of the 70s. In 92, he made a movie called The Player. One of his darkest, just biting pieces of satire he ever made. This is a really mean one. Very cold-hearted movie, I would say, but it's very funny too. It's just kind of giving you the laugh at Tim Robbins' character. Like he's just kind of this asshole who gets it over his head. He's just kind of like kind of fucks people over, so people kind of try to fuck him over. And yeah, it's just kind of this big thing, just big story. But the bottom line is it's just kind of it's just mocking your typical LA asshole, basically. It's really funny. I don't think it's as strong as some of his all-time best work, like some people might say, but I do think it lands a lot of really funny moments. And I think a lot of it's because I think it's just he didn't really have the same kind of care for humanity in this movie that he generally does. I think it almost feels like in the end he kind of wants you to just be like, oh, humanity stinks. I feel like it does have a little bit of that living in it, but it's just really entertaining all throughout. The dialogue's really good, and there's just, again, it's really fun watching the giant amount of actors. Again, because, in the 70s he had his bit, and now we're in the 90s, and it's like he's working with every big actor of the early 90s. It's just really fun catching all these notable names and whatnot. And yeah, 93, he made, man, sometimes I want to say this is like his best movie. This is really up there as one of his all-time masterpieces. I think next time I watch it, I'm probably going to have some thoughts that are going to make it grow on me even more. It's called Shortcuts. I think this is one of the most entertaining, most fascinating, and most important films I've ever made. The more I think about it, I think this film perfectly captures like what a day in the life of like the early '90s was like in a lot of specific detail ways. Because I was born in '93, so like I guess like I almost have like I guess this era is a little bit of a mystique in my eyes. Like I see like it's just interesting to me. Like it seemed like everyone was on a pretty different wavelength at this time than now. And I suppose I've always had a lot of subconscious fascination by that. I like what was going on that's different, you know? It's like this movie actually kind of like gives me a lot of answers. It's really about every good as an ensemble drama as Magnolia, although this one's a lot darker. I think Magnolia cares way more about humanity than this one. This one's just more. It's not like it doesn't care, but it's a lot more subtle and a lot more of a fisheye lens. Like again, it's got that. He can almost be like on a Kubrick level of detached, but it's different from Kubrick because Kubrick was just almost like entirely of a. Like he didn't care about his characters as much as Altman. Altman really does care about his characters, but he just wants to. In the end of the day, he's also wanting to just really look at them and understand them. Through their best and worst moments, you could say. But he's not judging at all. And that's the kind of the idea of Altman. You don't, just take it all in. I would say in the day, it's just like he's very curious. Like it's like he has like a childlike curiosity about these characters. That's kind of what the directing really feels like. And these are stories that author Raymond Carver had written, and Altman kind of collaborated with him to just put all these stories, interwove all these stories together, pace it all out. And it reminds me a lot of what Nashville was doing, honestly, except this is just even looser, even because, there's like, golly, I honestly haven't sat down and counted how many characters, but I'm sure it's about 24 to 30. There's so many storylines going on here, and they're all so good and interesting. They just leave you wanting more. And I feel like he really likes to hang out with his characters in that loose kind of way. Always significant long takes, zoom-ins. Like he was big on all that as a way of generating a certain level of suspense. Not in a traditional way, but it's more just like a rich kind of suspense where you almost don't know why we're watching all this, but somehow he's making it so interesting that it's almost like I'm dying to know more, even though technically there's not like too much intensity going on, but there also kind of is in his own way. It's so hard to explain exactly. I guess I just call it a very subtle film. It's very, very subtle, and it has a way of just really sticking with you long term after you watch it. My God, there's so many great performances in this movie. It's kind of insane. I really am a huge fan, particularly of like Julianne Moore. Oh, I love Julianne Moore's character. Tom Waits is perfect. And sometimes Tom Waits, it seems like he's just playing up to his persona, but honestly, it's so damn good that it works for his character. I don't even feel like I'm watching the musician I know and love. Like I feel like I'm literally into the character. It's amazing. I would say this movie really thrives on just. I think a lot of the draw of it is just intense intimacy with characters. It's almost like you're too close to home. You're watching characters at like just moments that they probably wouldn't be proud to share publicly, but it's like you're watching it and almost sometimes I'm watching thinking, I do that. I know people who do that, whatever. It almost just has this like way of life behind it where, all these things are happening, but in the end of the day, like, life kind of just goes on. No matter how awkward, good, bad that things are, like it always comes back to the same thing. And I think the movie really is masterful at communicating that. And again, this is more than ever. It feels like a looser Stanley Kubrick to me. That's what it feels like. Way more than like Paul Thomas Anderson. Paul Thomas Anderson almost had too much of a heart of gold to make a movie like this. This is a little darker. And the screenplay is just so perfect. It's about, and aesthetically speaking, it really just doesn't get more early 90s. This is about the most early 90s movie I've ever seen in my life. It's perfect. It's even really funny, really haunting. It really has a mystical like haunt behind it all. Some of these characters just really disturb me in the end. Like, oh my God, Chris Penn. Jeez, man, I don't even know how to talk about that. You just got to see that one for yourself. But it's really messed up where that one goes. Robert Downey Jr. is in it. Also a young one, a very drug. Back when he was like in a lot of drugs and stuff, you could kind of tell like even this character was kind of a lot like how he was at the time, which is really interesting. I love that. It's a pretty perfect movie the entire way through. Very unforgettable. So now the rest of the 90s, I don't really know much about it, so I'm not too interested in most of that stuff. So I'm just going to hop over to 2001 when he made Gosford Park. I love me a good ensemble drama, but this one just did not land for me in the same way as most of his films. It just felt almost like I know his films can have a certain coldness living in them, but usually his films end up making me feel warm and cozy, kind of modest inside. This one just kind of left me feeling really cold in the end. It's over 2 hours. It just felt like it went on and on. It was never grabbing me the way his best films have. I don't feel like he was as interested in his characters as much as he just kind of wanted to move this plot forward. That's the thing. Altman's not a plotty director, and I think seeing him take on this much plot just didn't feel like him, in my opinion. It really didn't feel like the same spark of magic that a lot of his movies have. I think that, the modesty, like I love it when Altman has some modesty living with him, and just a lot of layers with his characters, but I just wasn't feeling it in this one. In 2003, he made The Company. That's the last one of his I saw before he passed away. Yeah, I didn't like it very much, honestly. That was really boring. I think the part I like to see, I just kind of like to see Malcolm McDowell as a lead character in an Altman movie. That was pretty fun. Overall, the movie did nothing for me. It's just a typical ballet movie. It really didn't it made me think of Altman very much. It just felt like a forgettable drama, honestly. I know 2006 he made one last ensemble film before he passed away shortly after, called A Prairie Home Companion. I've not seen that. Haven't heard great things about it, but I still want to see it eventually. Just so I could be an Altman completist eventually, because he's definitely worth it. So that's Robert Altman. Yeah, man's one of a kind. Still a very underrated filmmaker, honestly. Made some of the greatest films of all time. The most, pure Americana, slices of Americana film. And yeah, his films will live on eternally. So I highly recommend going through the best of his filmography. Check it out.